Have you ever loved someone so hard that even after years, you still waited for a sign? That day, in front of dozens of guests, she smiled. But inside, something screamed. That wasn't the life he dreamed of. She married out of obligation, out of fear, for the promise they made to their parents, but not out of love. The dress was white, but inside, everything about her seemed gray. And while he said yes, with a choked voice, didn't know that an anonymous letter, discreetly left under his door, would bring back a past that she could never forget. Lucia, he was 22 years old. She was always the obedient daughter, the exemplary granddaughter, the one who never questioned the family's wishes. But there was a name that she whispered silently, every night before going to sleep: Andre. He was the first love, the only one. But it disappeared suddenly, as if it had been swallowed by time. No one ever explained. Nobody ever looked. And she learned to bury that feeling in silence. Until that moment. Because on that sultry afternoon, after the wedding, upon returning to the new house, which looked more like a castle without a soul, Lucia saw an envelope without a return address on the desk in her room. The hands were shaking. The heart raced. The paper was simple, but the content was devastating. Do you still think about me? Because I never stopped looking for you. It was his handwriting, the same one she would recognize even with her eyes closed. The words burned. Time stopped. The entire world seemed to spin in slow motion. Who delivered that? How did he find her? Why now? There, with her dress still wet from the tears that no one saw falling, she realized the story everyone thought was over was just beginning. And what came after was even more unbelievable. Stories like this don't appear by chance. They find those who need to feel them. Because everyone carries an unresolved love, a what if that still echoes in their chest. This story talks about courage, reunion, and the rare chance to rewrite destiny. Enjoy the video to show that it's still worth believing in true love. And subscribe to experience other stories that move the soul. The next chapter may touch exactly where you are most silent. Lucia was only 22 years old, but she already carried in her eyes the weight of a life decided by others. Since she was a child, she was molded to obey. Raised by her grandmother, a strict woman, marked by past losses, she learned early on that love was not a priority, it was a luxury. What mattered was maintaining tradition, honoring family agreements, upholding the name even if it came at the cost of one's own happiness. The house where he grew up was too quiet. Few hugs, many warnings. Love passes. What remains is stability, said the grandmother, always firm, always with that look that brooked no dispute. And it was like that, between warm cups of tea and unspoken rules, that Lucia pushed her dreams under the carpet. A beautiful rug, well ironed, but which hid a whirlwind. Her fiancé, Marcos, was a good catch. At least on paper. Son of an influential family, educated, without major mistakes. An old agreement had united their families for decades, and now, it would be sealed with their marriage. For everyone around, it was the perfect happy ending. For Lucia, it was the beginning of an even greater silence. She tried to smile at dinners, in engagement photos, in conversations about party decorations. But inside, a name kept echoing. Andrew. Andre was the opposite of all that. The love that emerged without being planned, without being allowed. He made her laugh effortlessly, understood her silences, and saw in her what she herself didn't know existed. When they were together, the world seemed lighter. There were secret plans, letters exchanged in secret, oaths made under the starry sky of that field where they met every Friday night. But everything changed suddenly. Andre disappeared without explanation. It disappeared as if it had never existed. No letter, no messages, no signal. For months, Lucia searched everything in silence. I was afraid to ask. Fear of the answer. Fear of confirming that love that seemed so right had been hers alone. And life went on, dragged, without color. Until the day she had to say yes to a man who never awakened her heart. It was as if he was giving his soul to a life he didn't choose to live. And maybe that was it. A silent sacrifice, made in the name of tradition. The cruelest thing is that, to the world, she was radiant. But no one saw the sleepless nights, the swollen eyes from holding back crying, the constant feeling of suffocation. Lucia smiled in the wedding photos, but inside, she screamed. And then, the letter came. That simple sheet of aged paper, written in the same handwriting that she had learned to recognize among so many old statements. That wasn't just any note. It was a vivid reminder of everything she tried to erase. Do you still think about me? Because I never stopped looking for you. These words reopened all the wounds. But they also rekindled something she thought was dead: hope. Andre was alive. And more than that, he still loved her. I was still looking for her. Now, stop and think with me. How many people do you know who have buried a love due to pressure? How many had to give up what they felt, just to meet expectations that were never theirs? That's why this story needs to be told. Because she doesn't just talk about Lucia and Andre. She talks about difficult choices, forced silences, deferred dreams. And it also talks about reunions that time was unable to prevent. This narrative touches deeply because it reveals what many people experience, but few have the courage to say out loud. True love, when it is real, does not disappear. He waits. He resists. He finds a way. And perhaps, by commenting on the story below, you are recognizing a piece of yourself in it. Maybe you remembered someone, a moment, a decision that still hurts. Right. Sharing can be the first step to understanding what still beats inside. Remember, when you interact with stories like this, you do more than like a video, you help keep alive the feeling that it's still possible to truly love. And this force is what moves this channel. Here, each story is a mirror. And the next one could very well be yours. Now he takes a deep breath, because what came after that letter was even more unexpected. And everything Lucia thought she knew was about to fall apart. That letter wasn't just a memory. It was a breakup. Ever since she read those words, something in Lucia began to break, or perhaps, to wake up. The silence that she had cultivated within her chest for years now gave way to a deep restlessness. Something she could no longer control. It was as if her own body started to reject the life they chose for her. Marcos, her husband, continued exactly as before. Cordial, absent, impenetrable. In the early days of their marriage, she still struggled to fit into her new role: wife, homemaker, elegant presence at his family's dinners and events. But it all sounded false. Everything about her was mechanical. Even the simplest gestures felt like a performance, as if she were living out the script of a character she hadn't written. In the morning, she would pretend to sleep until she heard the sound of the door closing as he left for work. He would sit on the edge of the bed and look at the wooden floor for long minutes, as if there were all the answers he needed. Nothing there really felt like yours. Not the furniture chosen by the mother-in-law, not the silk clothes in the closet, not the expensive cutlery on the dining table. The house was beautiful and completely empty. It was as if I had been placed inside a silent film. But the letter, that simple, yellowed sheet of paper, was the only thing that made noise inside it. Noise of memories, of possibilities, of a past that suddenly refused to be buried. She read it every day. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, when the crying kept me from sleeping. Sometimes in secret, locked in the bathroom, like someone hiding an addiction. Every time I ran my eyes over the words, I felt that shiver down my spine again. Andre was still somewhere. Looking for, waiting. And that was what made everything more unbearable. Knowing that her love wasn't gone, it was just somewhere else. Out of reach. On the other side of a life she didn't want. One late afternoon, Lucia found herself standing in front of the hallway mirror. He watched his own reflection for minutes. There was no sparkle in the eyes. There was no heat on the skin. Just a young woman, dressed to please, trapped in an existence that didn't belong to her. The look that returned from the mirror was that of someone who screams inside every day, but without making a sound. And there, in that instant, she understood. The letter wasn't just a sweet memory. It was an invitation, a challenge. The chance to choose for yourself, for the first time. It was then that something changed. The way she moved, the way she spoke, even the way she looked at Marcos. The discomfort took shape. The silence between them, which was previously accepted, now weighed heavily. She could no longer ignore the small details, the distant tone of voice, the dinners without conversation, the cold bed. He began to notice everything that was missing, and the truth emerged with a force that was impossible to silence. They never belonged to each other. Marcos, in turn, seemed to notice the change, but without knowing where it came from. He commented, with disdain, that she was distracted, too sensitive. One night, he said that she needed to adapt quickly, as if it were a new piece of furniture trying to match the old decor. But Lucia was no longer the same. She started spending more time alone. I walked around the city with my head full of memories. I passed the streets where I walked with Andre. I could smell his perfume in random places. I was looking for signs, and in every little detail, the heart raced, because now she knew he was nearby. Or at least, it never really went away. And this certainty, silent and pulsating, began to take up too much space inside her, to the point where it becomes impossible to continue pretending. Something in her cried out for an answer, for confrontation, for truth. The marriage that once seemed just empty now became unbearable. Every morning next to Marcos, the air seemed heavier. With each of his touches, a feeling of guilt and helplessness intensified. She no longer knew how to hide it. I didn't want to anymore. And then, a few days after the first letter, a new surprise awaited her. This time, much more direct. Much harder to ignore. It was as if fate was tired of waiting for her to make a decision, and decided to act on his own. That morning, Lucia woke up with a knot in her stomach. The kind of feeling that can't be explained in words, you just feel it. The sky was overcast, and the cold wind passed through the house like an omen. She had already read that second letter so many times that the corners were creased. This time, he didn't use metaphors. He was direct, as if time had taken away his patience for beating around the bush. I'll wait for you at our place, at the top of the hill, at 4. I'm not leaving until I see you. He signed with just a dash. But she knew. It was him. It was her. Andre. During the day, Lucia couldn't stay focused on anything. He walked around the house like a ghost. Every second that passed was a scream inside her. This wasn't just a reunion. It was a break with everything she had been silently accepting. It was a chance to look deeper into a story she believed had been destroyed without explanation. The afternoon arrived, and with it, a weight on my chest. The kind of choice that would change everything. She looked in the mirror one last time. It was different. In the eyes, there was no longer just pain, there was fire. The dress she chose was simple, without jewelry, without markings, without a mask. For the first time in years, she wanted to just be Lucia. He walked through the streets with firm steps, as if walking towards a place where the past and the future intersect. The taxi slowly climbed the hill. Every meter felt like an inch. Every curve, a memory. There, in that gazebo, she had promised so many things, and heard so many promises. It was where they met to escape the world, to imagine a what-if that now, years later, seemed to knock on the door again. When he arrived, the sun was already falling behind the trees, dyeing the sky with a golden tone of melancholy. The wind blew stronger at the top, as if nature also knew the weight of that moment. Lucia got out of the car, her heart beating like never before. And then she saw it. Andre was there, standing near the aged wooden fence. The same intense look, the posture that she knew so well, and a slight smile that trembled at the corner of her mouth. For a second, she didn't know if she was awake. He seemed to have come straight from the deepest memories. But it was there. In truth, she stopped, motionless. Time froze. No words, no explanation. Just two looks trying to recognize each other after years. He took a step forward, then another. And when they were just a few meters away from each other, the silence was broken by a single sentence. You don't know how long I've waited for this. Lucia felt her legs give out, but it didn't fall. He held her hand, and it was as if all the weight of the years between them had found relief in that touch. It was the same hand, the same heat, the same Andre. The truth came soon after. He didn't run away. He didn't abandon it. He was removed. That night, after I left you at home, I received a call. A man. He said that if I didn't disappear, his family would finish me off. They knew everything. They knew where I lived, where my mother worked. They gave me 24 hours to disappear from the city. I was just a boy, Lucia. I was scared. I tried to write, I tried to send news, but everything was intercepted. I had to disappear. The words fell like stones, but they didn't hurt. They explained. They sewed up an open wound. Lucia listened to everything in silence, her eyes wet but firm. Inside, an avalanche of feelings: relief, pain, anger, longing. Andre continued, I went far away. I worked everywhere. I could never forget you. Never. And when I found out about your marriage, something in me broke. I needed to do something. I tried to talk to you before, but I couldn't. So I left the letter. And I waited, not knowing if you would come. She took a deep breath. Her chest burned. It was as if I had carried a weight on my shoulders for years, and now, suddenly, I was allowed to let go. I came because I never forgot you, Andre. Because none of this made sense without you. They hugged right there, at the top of the hill. And it wasn't just any hug. It was the kind of hug that holds the other inside, who recognizes home. Lucia placed her head on his chest and closed her eyes. The world could be falling apart out there. But at that moment, in the silence of that gazebo, with the wind blowing her hair and his arms around her, she knew time can take almost everything except what is true. But there was still so much to be said. So much to be faced. The love was there, pulsing, more alive than ever. But the obstacles were there too. The ring on the finger, the marriage signed, the eyes of the family. The weight of everything that was built out of obligation. And it was now that Lucia would need to decide. Because after that reunion, pretending would be impossible. The past has returned. Love resisted. And what came next could change everything, forever. The hug lasted long enough to make Lucia remember who she was before everything, before the rules, before the promises made by others, before the planned life at a dinner table where she never had a voice. Leaning against Andre's chest, with his scent mixed with the afternoon wind, she closed her eyes and felt, just felt it, and that, in itself, was already something huge. A kind of permission she had forgotten she had. To feel, to choose, exist outside the expectations of others. But when she pulled away a little to look into his eyes, she realized that there wasn't just love there was also the weight of time. What they experienced before was intense, but it was juvenile. Now, it was different. Now there were marks, decisions, blame and stories that needed to be carried. There was a ring on her left finger, a house with her name engraved on the facade, a surname that wasn't Andre's. And there was also the certainty that, upon returning, nothing would be the same again. It didn't matter which direction he took. Andre seemed to know. He didn't insist. He didn't ask. He didn't press. He just held her hands firmly and said in a low voice, almost like a whisper from a tired soul, "You don't owe me anything. But if there's still room for us, I'll be here. Just like I've always been. Waiting." She didn't respond. He just nodded with a slight movement of his head, his eyes red and teary. Each tear that fell there carried years of silence, of submission, of silent desires. It was as if the crying washed away the guilt, the fear, and even the shame she had carried for so long for. Still loving someone who, for all intents and purposes, was in the past. And then came the most difficult moment. That second suspended in time when life awaits the choice. Andre slowly released her hands. Lucia took a step back. Then another. He looked at the horizon, where the road split. One led back to the city, to the soulless house, to Marcos and everything that was safe, right, expected. The other led to an uncertain destination. A path where there was no guarantee, but there was truth. She turned her back, her hair blowing in the wind. Eyes fixed on the ground, as if looking for strength in the concrete of the path. His shoulders were shaking slightly. It wasn't cold. It was the weight of the decision. The sun was already beginning to disappear over the horizon. The sky dyed in shades of pink and gold seemed to observe in silence that moment, so human, so vulnerable. The kind of moment that defines a life. Lucia took a few more steps. The camera now followed her from behind. I couldn't see his face. I couldn't tell where, exactly, she was going. Every spectator there, at that exact moment, needed to decide for her. Complete the path with your own story, your own desire, your own courage or fear. Because that's the beauty of real stories. They do not deliver ready-made answers. They provoke. They invite you to look inside and ask, what if it were me? The simple dress fluttered slightly in the wind. The sound of footsteps on the dry trail marked the rhythm. And the final image was her, following. We don't know whether to return to the prison of a soulless marriage, or to run towards a love that never stopped being hers. And maybe you don't even need to know. Perhaps the most important thing is there. When in doubt, in the space between desire and choice. In the cry that is not heard, but that vibrates in every person who has ever had to suffocate their own heart out of loyalty to a world that demands more obedience than truth. And now, whoever watches it, carries that same doubt in their chest. Because when you see Lucia there, with her back turned, walking away, you feel it. You remember. You recognize yourself. And maybe that's why commenting below is more than participating in a video, it's freeing something that was trapped inside you too. Share what you saw there. Which path do you believe she chose? Or, better yet, which path would you choose? She slowly walked away, and I swear, at that moment, it felt like the world had stopped just to see where she was going. She didn't look back, but you could see that everything inside her was struggling. You know that feeling of having carried the weight of a lifetime without being able to let go? That was it. It was all there, in her shoulders, in her slow step, in the way she held back her tears. But at the same time, there was a calmness. As if the body had understood before the mind that something was changing. Andre stayed there. Stopped. With that look of someone who has lived too long with words stuck in their throat. But he didn't run after, he didn't scream, he didn't make a scene, he just waited. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Because when someone truly loves, they don't need to beg. It just stays. And he stayed. She followed. First in silence. The path is half dirt, half bush. The rustle of dry leaves underfoot. The sky slowly starting to darken, that orange tone that seems like goodbye. And that's when I realized she wasn't just deciding between two men. She was deciding between two versions of herself. On the one hand, the world they built for her. The house, the marriage, the beautiful name. The family watching, approving, controlling. On the other, love. Just like that. But it wasn't just any love. He was the one who survived time, silence, threats, absence. The kind of love that doesn't always give peace, but always gives truth. She stopped, right in the middle of the road. She stood there for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity. He looked at the ground, took a deep breath. And I swear, at that moment, it felt like she was listening to her heart for the first time in years. There was no telling what she was going to do. She didn't say anything. He didn't turn to anyone. He just stood there, with the wind messing up his hair and his face wet with tears. It was as if she said with her body everything she never had the courage to say out loud. Now it's up to me to choose. And I stood there, watching that woman who, until a few days ago, was just another person in the life they chose for her, become someone different, stronger, more free. She started walking again, slowly, the firmest steps now. And the most beautiful? The camera was left behind, you know? We just saw her going. I couldn't see the face. There was no way to know if she was going to return home or run to Andre. And you want to know? Maybe you don't even need to know. Because, at that time, what really mattered wasn't the destination. It was the movement. It was the fact that she had finally left the place where she had been standing for so long. And that's where the story catches us. Because everyone was Lucia once. Everyone has felt like they needed to choose between what's right for others and what's true for themselves. Everyone has had that moment of silence where their entire life fits into one breath. And she went, little by little disappearing at the end of the trail. But what remained here, inside me, inside whoever saw? It was clear as day. Not every marriage starts with love, but every true love deserves a second chance. She went, and didn't come back. Not for what was expected of her. Not for the big house, nor for the marriage he used as armor. Lucia continued forward, and that same evening, she chose the path that led to Andre. There was no dramatic scene, there was no soap opera speech. There was just a silent reunion between two bodies that recognized each other before the words even came back. When she got to him, she didn't say anything, he just held his hand, and he understood. Because sometimes, when love is real, it doesn't need an explanation, just presence. They sat there, on the gazebo, both of them watching the sun go away behind the trees. No rush. No new promises. Just breathing that moment that took years to happen. It was there that Lucia, for the first time in her life, felt whole. Not perfect, not without fear, but whole. For once, she didn't need to please anyone. Don't even follow the script. She just needed to be. And there, with Andre by her side, she was. In the days that followed, everything slowly fell into place. Lucia had to face her grandmother, her family, and the judgment of others. And yes, there was pain. There was guilt. There was doubt. But she didn't back down, because now she knew that true love is not easy, but it is firm. It's the one that stays when the rest fall. Andre started again beside her. They rediscovered the places that marked the past and built new rituals, new stories. Sometimes it still hurt to remember everything they lost. But they didn't use the past as a prison. They used it as fuel. And that made all the difference. Lucia smiled again with her eyes. She danced around the house again, singing softly while cutting vegetables, lying on his lap on the sofa with her headlight. Life has not become a fairy tale. But it became a real life, with soul, with truth, with choice. And do you know what this story leaves at the end? A simple but powerful truth. You can spend years living what is expected of you, but the day you decide to live what you feel, everything changes. Because love isn't what feels right to everyone. Love is what makes sense when you close your eyes, take a deep breath and listen to what your heart, even if it's wounded, still has to say. Anyone who has come this far knows, this story is not just about Lucia and Andre. It's about every person who has ever felt too much, who has ever loved in silence, who has ever had to choose between what was expected and what was true. This channel is made for those who feel deeply, for those who are not afraid to delve into the rawest emotions, the most difficult decisions, the truths that no one has the courage to tell. Signing up here is like saying, I also believe that stories can heal. It's being part of a space where each video touches, transforms, makes you think. And now, comment just one word below, choice. Anyone who lived this story to the end knows, it all starts when we choose to truly feel. There are stories that arrive slowly, like a whisper. Others come as a shock. They change everything, without warning. Stick around for the next story. Because when the truth knocks on the door, it doesn't wait to be invited. She enters. Reveal. Disassemble. And it forces the heart to choose again. The next video doesn't just tell a story. It lights something up. And whoever feels it will understand.